Hi, everyone. Welcome to our webinar, Beyond Selfie Missions, How Missions Became All About Me and What to Do About It. We are so glad you are here. My name is Stephanie Robinson, and I'm from Faith to Action, and this is a webinar co-hosted by Faith to Action and the Chalmers Center, and I am so grateful to be facilitating our discussion. For the first hour of our agenda today, we will be hearing from our panelists as they share their context and their experiences. Then we will have an optional 30 minutes of question and answer that we hope you will stick around for. You can add your questions into the question and answer feature at any time during the discussion. We will happily answer as many questions as possible during the last 30 minutes. The American Church has spent the last decade assessing our relationship to global missions, and at the same time, we've experienced many changes. It is important that we spend our time and effort considering these changes and trends to ensure that we are aligned with God's calling in Scripture. There has been a cultural undertow that has led us to missions activities where we are the beneficiaries of our own missions work. Global missions are growing towards practices that fulfill us more than they serve others. There are many ways you can see how selfie missions have impacted missions. At Faith to Action, we have seen this as a reality in how the U.S. Church supports orphaned and vulnerable children around the world. Selfie missions could certainly have described a huge part of my global experience in missions. I worked in Haiti with children without much training, but I had an open heart and a belief that God would and could use me well. I wanted so desperately to serve God and others while working in Haiti, but I was naive and unaware as to the extent of my actions. I started my journey over a decade ago in missions, moving overseas after a missions trip to work at an orphanage. I lived in Haiti and volunteered at an orphanage for over 4 years, and I really believed I was helping and doing good work. Building support for the orphanage was pretty easy. Everyone in my home church and my friends back home, as well as my local missionary friends, wanted to support the orphanage. However, the more time I spent there and as I learned the local language, I started to realize there were greater complexities around care for children than I originally anticipated. The ways I was engaging simply were not as impactful as I would have hoped for the children. For example, one Sunday I was attending church at the orphanage and noticed a group of women who would come consistently, sitting with some of the orphans in the back of the church. I asked, "Who are these women?" to one of the orphanage directors, and without hesitation, he responded, "These are their mothers." Up until then, I thought these children were orphans, children who didn't have parents or whose parents were very abusive. I was shocked. I slowly discovered that children in this orphanage were not there because they didn't have loving parents. It was because their parents were very poor and not able to provide in the way that they would have liked to. As I later learned, the parents saw the orphanage as a place of hope, with schooling, food, and college opportunities. So I began to wonder if there was a better way to help these children by supporting their families. Ultimately, my husband and I decided to pivot our focus, and instead of focusing on gaining support to help the orphanage, we came alongside some local Haitians to help them protect families. And that work continues today through an organization called Combit Haiti. This discussion is incredibly meaningful to me because I get to help others avoid the pitfalls I fell into, and together we can be more effective and impactful in the way we pursue God's mission around the world. So our hope with this webinar is that you will learn practical ways to negate selfie missions, to realign your missions efforts with the heart of God, and participate in transformational and reconciling missions work around the world. So without further ado, here are our speakers. Please welcome Dr. Hunter Farrell, the director of Pittsburgh Theological Seminary's World Mission Initiative. Dr. Farrell, please share a little bit about yourself and why this issue is so important to you.
Thanks, Stephanie. What a pleasure to be on this webinar with you. I'd say I grew up in a mission-minded church in Dallas, Texas. Spent most of my life kind of dreaming about becoming a missionary. I went to Fuller Theological Seminary when the time was right. And I spent about 30 years. I've spent 30 years as a missionary in Congo, in Peru, worked in 4 languages and had some really life-changing experiences. I now teach missions here at Pittsburgh Theological Seminary. I did my doctoral work looking at the impacts of the violence of the Shining Path Liberation Army on children in a particular highland community, a Quechua-speaking community in Peru, during my 10 years of mission service there. I was doing further research on kids and the impacts of different mission strategies on children when I was living in Lima, Peru. And I began to ask some questions of child sponsorship programs and orphanages and orphan care programs. I found out some interesting things. I remember asking a woman, a Peruvian mother, who had a child who was in the sponsorship program that I was studying. And she said to me, as she talked about all the benefits of the program and how she appreciated it, but she said, "There's one thing though, would you want a foreign adult writing regularly to your 7-year-old daughter?" And I was shocked. I had a 9-year-old daughter at the time. And I said, absolutely not. What would give anyone the thought that they had the right to write to my daughter? And it helped me to realize that there was a whole perspective that we weren't taking into account oftentimes as we sponsor children, as we give to orphanages. And so a colleague, Bala Kelep, and myself here at Pittsburgh Seminary began to do research. We surveyed or interviewed about 1,200 congregational mission leaders across the U.S. church perspective, from Roman Catholic to evangelical to mainline Protestant. And we found some results that were fairly shocking to us, and we'll talk about those perhaps later in the interview. Yeah, thanks so much, Stephanie. It's great to be here.
Thanks for being here. We're also so grateful to have with us Emmanuel Nabieu here with us. He is known as NABS. NABS is a global child advocate for orphaned and vulnerable children and their families, and was recently awarded the United States President Lifetime Achievement Award. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself, NABS?
Sure. Thank you, everyone, and I'm glad to be here, and welcome. Where I am Emmanuel Nabieu, commonly called NABS. I spent 10 years of my childhood and teenage years in an orphanage in Sierra Leone, West Africa. After aging out of that orphanage and completing university, I came back and eventually became the director of that same orphanage. So under my leadership, one of my first leadership decisions was to be able to partner with our partners in the US and other stakeholders in the country through meaningful collaboration, so that we could be able to successfully transition that orphanage to family-based care. This was to ensure that orphaned children and youth have the best opportunity to thrive in safe, nourishing families and environments as well. So I am passionate about keeping families together due to my experience of being separated from my loved ones for that many years, especially knowing that they were alive and denied access to be able to see me and interact with me. So the focus is on creating a holistic future where vulnerable children and their families can thrive with dignity, rather than being separated and dependent on external assistance. So I presently work with as the Director for Mission Advancement and Partnership at Helping Children Worldwide, a nonprofit organization based in the greater Washington, D.C. area, which equips and empowers nearly 2,000 vulnerable children in 450 families in Sierra Leone. So as I said, I'm a global child advocate and a speaker, and my professional background is in applied psychology, leadership, international development, and life coaching and child welfare. So I'm so much honored to be here, and I'm looking forward to sharing our experiences together. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us. And last but not least, we have Dr. Brian Fikkert here with us today. He's the co-author of the best-selling book, When Helping Hurts, and he's the founder and president of the Chalmers Center. Dr. Fikkert, welcome. Can you also share how your work integrates into this topic?
It's a great joy to be with all the panelists today and all the participants online. I'm an economist who specializes in poverty alleviation, but I also just have a deep love for the local church and for parachurch ministries that come out of the local church. And so I've been able to kind of combine those interests into something called the Chalmers Center for Economic Development at Covenant College. And the Chalmers Center is trying to help God's people to work amongst the poor in ways that restore the poor to all that it means to be human, to be an image bearer. And unfortunately, we've learned that oftentimes good intentions are not enough. It's possible to hurt the poor in the very process of trying to help them. As Hunter describes in his outstanding book, one of the main causes for such harm is that we're often more focused on ourselves rather than on God's mission. And that shows up a lot, in particular in the space of orphanages and vulnerable children, as Nabs was referring to. So it's just a joy to be with you folks today.
Thank you so much. We're so grateful that you've taken this time to be here with us. So thanks so much. We're going to go ahead and jump into some questions. Dr. Farrell, your new book, Freeing Congregational Mission, uses the term selfie missions. What do you mean by that term?
Yeah, thanks, Stephanie. This is one of those where it's a trend, it's a cultural movement that affects us all. And so I speak of this speaking to myself as much as to anyone who's listening. I think our grandparents' generation understood mission to be loving service to neighbors near and far. It was that proclamation of the gospel that begins with the personal relationship. Costly, long-term self-sacrifice characterize this understanding of proclamation and service, as witnessed in the tens of thousands of missionaries who served their entire careers in challenging circumstances, sometimes even dangerous places. But our research shows today that the language of personal transformation is quickly replacing that loving service to the world as a primary motivation for mission. Bala and I, my co-author and I, were amazed that in a country like ours that highly values efficiency, we Americans annually send billions of dollars to relatively inefficient mission industries that can generate negative and even unintended consequences for the communities they seek to serve. For example, child sponsorship is a growing $3.2 billion industry. U.S. Christians support that each year. And those industries must use a significant amount of their money each year to provide almost concierge-like donor services, translating donor letters, children's letters, facilitating donor requests, getting a particular package out to that child in their particular village. All of these, what would happen, we wondered, if American Christians committed to helping vulnerable children on the long haul without enjoying the concierge services they become so accustomed to? We think about short-term mission trips that annually cost U.S. Christians about $5 billion. Mission experts have roundly criticized the waste and inefficiency inherent in a system that transports folks like me, quite unqualified to build anything, trust me. And it takes us to places, the context of which we don't know. Finally, orphanages. For decades, the number of children housed in orphanages has been decreasing because child experts were showing us that children simply don't thrive in an institutional setting. They need families. God created children to live in families. But today, orphanages have become a mushrooming industry in many nations of the global South in particular, because our desire to help, that desire to make a difference in the life of one child is twisting itself into a mission strategy that's not good for children. This is the essence of selfie mission, is how we call it. When our needs take precedence over the needs of these vulnerable children that God has called us to love. When we support relatively inefficient mission programs because they're satisfying to us, rather than supporting initiatives built on mission partners' felt needs and their own resources. Selfie mission is when we focus exclusively on the vulnerable child in ways that invisibilize that child's family, the very people that God has placed around the child to care for the child. This is selfie mission, and quite frankly, it lures us away from mission in the way of Jesus Christ. That's the concern that moved us to write this book, Freeing Congregational Mission. Stephanie, thanks.
Wow, thank you for sharing that. Yeah, one of the 3 examples of selfie missions given in Dr. Farrell's book is orphanages. So Nabs, as an expert, also with personal experience as a recipient of missions for orphaned and vulnerable children, what are some of the misconceptions of people regarding supporting orphanages?
Well, first of all, I mean, the orphanage I grew up in provided amazing services, right? Like education and healthcare and food. So, that had many children, including myself, when I was living there with our basic needs. Missionaries, of course, as he spoke about, missionaries will come visit us multiple times a year to run a lot of activities like the Vacation Bible School and tutoring programs. We always loved getting these visitors from the US, and we learned so much from them. They were so kind and loving and genuinely wanted to support or wanted to help, right, the situation, to help us, the children who are living in the orphanage. But what they didn't understand, often they understand, was the complexity of an orphanage, really. So all of the missionaries assumed that because we were in an orphanage, we must be orphans. Of course, when I tell people this, in an American mind, when they tell that I'm going to visit an orphanage, you assume, oh, the children in there are orphans. So sometimes there's really no way for them to even ask all those questions. Are you guys real orphans? And I came to understand, even before they could go on those mission trips, they'll be trained to ask them. You don't have to ask those children about their family status, because that might traumatize them further or things like that. So what they didn't realize was that almost all of us had families. Well, later we all know now that the number one reason children go to orphanages is not because of lack of families. It's because of poverty. It's because their families are too poor, right? So we know that poverty, not debt, is the number one cause for family separation in most developing countries, like my country in Sierra Leone. Because these children go to orphanages because their families believe that their child's best hope, is to give them to the orphanage, because the poor families want their children to have access to a better life. The better life includes education, food, and healthcare. They believe that this is the only solution they have to secure a better future for their children. But what are they doing? They are doing this at the expense of that genuine love and connection that they and their children truly need to thrive. These families love their children very much, and they want to be with them. They send their children away because they really, really love them. They want them to have access to these opportunities. However, once they send them to these orphanages, you see, these institutions can now kind of assume that, either to be neglectful or they are inadequate. And as a result, they are considered to be unsafe, and they completely lose the ability to interact with their children. So this is something they might not have even thought of could happen, right? So during my 10 years at the orphanage, even though I was getting access to all these tangible resources, but I longed to belong. I was desperate to see my family, just like many other children were. And I wanted to know how were they doing. So when I became the director, I knew that although the children's basic needs were being met, we needed to help the children build a better future that included their families and communities they belong to. So as we started to research how to serve the children better, we started to realize that many orphanages, including the one I was leading, were not necessarily serving orphans, but mostly children coming from poor families. The research is clear. 80 to 90% of children in orphanages actually have a living parent who could care for them. And this was absolutely true in Sierra Leone. We discovered that 98% of the children that had ever lived in our orphanage had a living parent, right, who could care for them. And almost all of them had relatives, caring relatives, uncles, aunties, and grandparents who are ready to take care of them if they had the means to do so. So even I was shocked by these statistics. It was just something we didn't talk about in the orphanage. I grew up with 40 children, considered to be like my brothers and sisters, and we never knew each other's stories. So it was something like a taboo. And even the staff and missionaries didn't ask us about our families, and for fear of upsetting or traumatizing us further, or the families for fear of losing the opportunity, because we wanted to go to school, wanted to have food. So we are afraid that we'll lose the opportunity if they find out maybe that we have families who are out there. So likewise, we didn't talk about that. So I know that everyone going on mission trips or partnering to support orphanages has a big heart and wants to truly help children and serve in other ways. But however, it is critical to understand that these complexities and their long-term impacts on children, right, families, and their communities can be real. It is not short-lived. It is a lifelong impact. When children live in an institution, getting all these tangible resources at the expense of the true love and community they can get in their community and families.
Yeah, wow. Thank you for sharing that, Nabs. It's so important that we hear, seek to understand, and prioritize the impact those of us in the US are having on our global missions partners, the children and the communities that we are seeking to serve. And in addition, I think Selfie missions also have a negative impact on us. Selfie missions don't just hurt the global partner, but they impact the maturity and the transformation of US Christians and churches. Brian, you've spent a lot of your time with the American church after writing When Helping Hurts. How are you seeing Selfie missions impacting the US church?
Yeah, I'm about to say some hard things, but as I do so, I want to admit that I'm struggling with all of the things that I'm about to talk about, that I am broken, that I'm in process like everybody else. My view is that one of the fundamental problems facing the American church is that we don't know the answer to a very basic question. Why did Jesus come to earth? Why did Jesus come to earth? The vast majority of evangelical Christians in America will answer the question this way: Jesus came to die on the cross to pay the penalty for my sins so that my soul can go to heaven someday when I die. And that's true. We don't want to lose sight of that. Jesus, we really are sinners, and Jesus really does pay the penalty for our sins, and that makes us justified before a righteous and holy God. I don't doubt that for a second. It's profoundly important. It's the centerpiece of the gospel. But there's more. You see, at the start of Jesus' earthly mission, he says he's come to preach the good news of the kingdom of God. That's why he was sent. Luke chapter 4, verse 43. And so the kingdom of God is a bigger story than just my justification and just getting my sins paid for. It's a bigger story. As the scriptures unfold, we realize that it's really about reconciling all things in heaven and on earth. Colossians chapter 1 says that Jesus Christ is the creator and sustainer and reconciler of all things. To reconcile is to put things into right relationship again. It means restoring individuals, families, dirt, turtles, the Green Bay Packers. It means restoring everything to the way that God intended those things to be. It's a comprehensive reconciliation. In 2 Corinthians chapter 5, we read that believers are new creatures in Christ. We're called to participate in God's reconciling work. But when we reduce that big story down to Jesus came to die on the cross to save me from my sins, what do we do when the alarm clock goes off on Monday morning? So we've accepted Christ. Our soul is going to go to heaven. The alarm clock goes off on Monday morning. What do we do? How do we live? Well, the church doesn't really or hasn't communicated the biblical story that we're supposed to be living into. And that's a story of Christ's mission of reconciling all things. And so we don't have a story. So we worship God on Sunday. We get out of bed on Monday morning. We need a story to live into. Well, most of us just default to the story of the culture around us, the story of the American dream, a very self-centered, highly individualistic, very materialistic, narcissistic way of being in the world. And so basically the message is get your soul to heaven and live your best life now. And I think that shows up in all kinds of ways, including how we do missions and how we work with vulnerable children all over the world. The good news, there's a better story. There's a better story for vulnerable children. There's a better story for you and for me.
Whew, amen. That was great. We can easily minimize the good work that God is doing in our world and our role in it. Hunter, you share some valuable principles in your book about realigning our missions work with this bigger understanding of the gospel. What is this better way of doing mission work?
Yeah, thanks, Stephanie. And thanks, Brian, for framing this in the larger picture of God's story. That's really helpful. I think as we look back at mission history, the beauty and also the pain of mission history, we see that in the early church, mission followed in the way of Jesus. The new Christians were mostly poor and politically powerless. But beginning in the 4th century, Christianity becomes the official religion in the Roman Empire, and Christian mission becomes increasingly co-opted by the state in return for the perks of power and privilege. We became the chaplains of the imperial armies going out. That colonial era catapults us, beginning in the 15th and 16th centuries. It catapults this understanding of mission from a position of power around the globe, and it places missionaries on the same sailing ships that transport colonial armies, enslaved Africans, and stolen minerals. This is the understory, the underside, if you will, of the story of mission that we need to recognize and just have to name. This is a part of our own heritage. Tragically, it's this colonial view of mission that has profoundly distorted the understandings that we have today. Think about it, if you will. Many of our congregations in the U.S. today engage in mission strategies that are built on the faulty foundations, if you will, of colonial mission. Think about it. We're the doers of mission, and people living in poverty receive mission from us. We know better than they do what the solutions to their problems are. We believe that mission functions like a help desk, where we're there to give our time, our money, and our ideas to solve people's problems. That's why in our book, Freeing Congregational Mission, Bala Kelep and I look at Jesus' mission as God's model. And we propose a substantive reformation, if you will, in the ways that our American congregations engage in God's mission. We frame it around 3 issues, and we think about this as the 3 stones in a cooking fire that supports you. It's the place where people come together to share hospitality, to share a meal, and be more real with each other. It's a space of authenticity and vulnerability. Those 3 principles are these. It's a return to mission built on the power of transformative human relationships. We call that a theology of companionship, that spreading circle of love that moves from Jesus to his disciples and eventually turns the whole world upside down. That's what we call companionship. The second element is what we call a hunger for cultural humility. It's a need our desire to love our neighbors across lines of human difference, whether that difference is language or race or ethnicity or economic class or gender identity, whatever that is. We want to love our neighbors, but we need specific skills and a deep sense of humility to be able to love our neighbor across those lines. Thirdly, a perspective we call co-development. We couldn't find a word in the English language. There's in some other languages, there's some interesting ideas. But in English, we call it co-development. It frees us from that illusion that makes us believe we can develop someone else who's living in poverty, to see ourselves as their saviors, which is heretical. If we say it out loud, we know that, but we function, as Brian has alluded, we function in ways that we're actually the solution, God's hands and feet. We're God's solution to their problems. Rather, in fact, we're called by God to be companions on this road. All of us are in need of God's healing and forgiveness and mercy. All of us need to be developed, and we can help each other, develop each other by removing barriers from another person's development or giving them tools for their development. But in the summary, all of us stand in need of God's grace and healing and forgiveness.
Mm-hmm. I couldn't agree more. Hallelujah. I'm a Presbyterian and we're not allowed to show emotions. Hallelujah. I couldn't agree more. Most of us in America, we kind of implicitly think that the goal is to turn Uganda into America. But that's the wrong goal, because both Uganda and America are fundamentally broken. Folks, think about it. Despite our unprecedented material prosperity in America, we're miserable. And if you look at the self-reported happiness of Americans, it continues to decline. Anxiety and depression are skyrocketing. And it's not just because of the iPhone. Research shows that the increase in anxiety and depression amongst American college-age students has been steadily rising since the 1930s. Our families, our churches, our communities, and our nation is coming apart at the seams. We're simply not created to be self-centered, highly individualistic, consuming robots. But the irony is that we kind of persist in saying to poor people, come be like us. We're the goal. Come join us in our misery. Folks, the goal isn't to turn Uganda into the United States. The goal is to join Jesus Christ in his mission of making both Uganda and the United States look more like the New Jerusalem. That's a different goal, and it requires different ways of achieving those goals. And that's what Hunter is trying to get at, I think, in his book. And the three that he mentioned, the three principles: the theology of companionship, the cultural humility, and the co-development. Spectacular. But we're not in the right mindset or heart posture right now to pursue those three well.
Yeah, I agree. Our cultural biases are so strong. How do we begin to push back on those? How can we reflect on those patterns and move in a different direction?
Well, I think a good starting point, Stephanie. I mean, for me, the need for each other, how desperately we need local mission partners and global mission partners to help us see ourselves with new eyes. For me personally, one of the greatest challenges to engaging faithfully in God's mission is the unchecked baggage that I carry around with me, those assumptions, those scripts from previous generations that just swirl around in my head. A lot of those are cultural messages that Brian has suggested, given to me by advertising, given to me by social media. I remember I was 22 years old. I was a volunteer in Congo. It was my first mission experience. And I was asked by a village development committee of this local church to help them with a development project. Well, I knew the statistics of how many kids in that village and in that region were dying at an early age because of impure water. And I knew that the answer to their problem was clean water. But the church, if you can imagine this, they wanted to develop a soccer field around by the church building so that the whole village could have a little pride in their village. Well, I thought this was crazy. You know, I thought it was the dumbest idea in the world, quite frankly. I was shocked, and I had to think about it. I actually had to pray and said, God, can I participate in this effort of these people? Because I don't think that's what they should be doing. I mean, the hubris of all of this is coming to the fore, as you can see. I finally acquiesced and agreed to stay for the weekend. And on that appointed day, let me tell you, the church mobilized everyone to help. Men removed the stones and rocks, kids helped out, the women of the church cooked a goat meal with all the fixins that would be remembered to this day. When the youth team finally gathered that afternoon, they were each presented with a white jersey with their names sewn on it. By the time that game started, friends, the visiting team didn't stand a chance. We smashed them 4-0. No questions asked. The celebration and the singing lasted into the night. And one of the village elders, one of the church elders, walked me to where I was going to catch my bus back into the city. And he whispered to me, could you come back next weekend? We'd like to talk about that water project. Suddenly, I realized these guys were 2 steps ahead of me. They were way ahead of me in this game. I realized in a moment that these leaders knew that, you know, this is what Fortune 500 well-paid consultants tell you. You know, you go for the easy win, go for the quick response so your group can get together and get used to working together and collaborating. Well, these folks knew that inherently. And so they looked for the easy task before they tackled the more challenging task of cleaning up their water supply, because that would require everyone in the village working together. Well, I asked myself when I got home that night, I said, Where did I get that idea, that attitude, that I actually assumed that I knew better than these people what they needed for their own community? Where did that come from? That was remarkably similar to a colonial myth that we know better than they know. And that was frightening to me. I barely spoke their language. I knew nothing of the gifts and hopes and dreams of that community. What led me to believe that I knew better than they did? I realize that colonial legacy continues to impact the ways many of us engage in mission. And that's why in Freeing Congregational Mission, Stephanie, we're inviting people to engage in slow mission, to slow things down a little bit, to put the brakes on and engage in a conversation with our local and global partners who can help us see ourselves with new eyes, taking the time to go deeper in relationship, to listen to what people need and their vision for addressing that need. What resources are they willing to put on the line to engage in the process of development themselves? I think NAB's work with vulnerable children is a great example that shows us that long, slow mission, because it's a long road. We're in this together and we're companions in Christ's mission. Yeah, thanks.
That is so hard for me to slow down. I like to get things done. And the idea of slow mission is a hard thing for me to embrace. But folks, if we want to address the root causes of there being vulnerable children, as Nabs was saying earlier, we've got to address the primary cause of that, and that's poverty. An effective and sustainable poverty alleviation is not about rushing in with all kinds of outside resources. Rather, it's a slow relational process that walks with local people as they steward their own gifts and their own resources to live into God's story, his redeeming mission. And that means we've got to use an asset-based approach. A needs-based approach, as we described it when Helping Hurts, focuses on what's wrong, what's missing, and then we try to fill that in for people. But an asset-based approach starts by saying, there's good here in this community because Christ has been active here since creation. And the people here are image bearers, and they've been doing some good things. They have gifts and they have resources. In this particular case, the most essential asset for child rearing is already present in impoverished settings, families. As Nabs was mentioning earlier, it's estimated that approximately 80% of the children living in orphanages have at least one living biological parent. And in addition, there's networks of extended family members and friends that are also willing to step up and help take care of vulnerable children. Of course, simply taking children and out of an orphanage and putting them into a family is quite risky because families struggle, right? We all struggle to raise our kids. And if you're struggling with immense poverty, it's even more difficult. And so in this light, the key strategy really is to holistically strengthen families in impoverished settings, strengthen them socially, strengthen them emotionally, relationally, spiritually, and economically. And that takes time.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing, you guys. If we're going to do these things that we're talking about, mutual relationships, cultural humility, co-creation with our global partner, specifically in orphan care, what does that look like? Nabs, can you help us get out of our own cultural assumptions and see the context and problem from your perspective? What do you do today when you are engaging people and advocating for best practice in global orphan care? What does it mean to engage well in orphan care?
You're talking to me? So you got stopped somewhere when I was talking. I didn't hear the last part.
Oh yeah, sorry. I was just asking, can you hear me now? I was just asking.
Yes, I can hear you now.
What does it mean to promote better practices in global orphan care, specifically as we're applying these three things that we've been talking about: mutual relationships, cultural humility, and co-creation?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Thank you very much. And this is awesome. So first, it is a call to all donors out there, U.S. churches and missionaries. There is no doubt that, again, we all want to do good. we mean well. So as believers, we follow the teaching about caring for widows and orphans. This is Psalm 68, verse 6 says, God sets the lonely in families. So the direction is start caring for these children in families. So it is good to know that what truly separates children and families, right, are not those intangible needs like love and connection. Now we know what tears families apart are those physical needs like access to food, education, clothing, and healthcare. But the thing is, no child has to choose between family and the tools they need to build a better future. Why? Because we can do both, because there's a better way, to do both. When we learn better and know better, we can do better, right? So let's invest in empowering families, right? So that the 2021 Barna study shows that the US Christians give about $2.5 billion, annually to support residential care orphanages. Of course, you see, these supporters, again, they mean well. They have good hearts and they want to help vulnerable children. But however, imagine how much good this investment could do, right? In addressing the root causes of extreme poverty. If we use them to empower families instead of creating more orphanages. We do not have orphan crisis, which seems to be, if you imagine like how many orphans we have in the world that are designated children designated as orphans. But what we have is an orphanage crisis. We have millions of children that are growing up without having the true experience of a family. So some institutions can try to provide a sense of family or a sense of belonging, right, to a family. But the truth is, as someone who grew up in an orphanage, spent like 10 years, I can tell you it's never the same. It's not only about having a sense of something. How do you actually enjoy it and experience it? Even the very best institution is still an institution. For example, our own institution in those days that we class as one of the best childcare institutions in the country. So at some point, we even shifted it from a dormitory style of living with one house mother for boys and one house mother for the girls to a family group style, just to try to imitate or mimic life in a family and maybe try to give the children a sense of family or a sense of belonging. But as someone who spent many years there as a child and came back to live, I can tell you that it was still not quite the same as a family. It was never equal to a family of their own for each child. It is only in the family that children can truly live and experience the joy of family and belonging. So during our family reunification workshops nowadays, we normally do an exercise called the one child, right, activity. So this is where we all get on the same page and understand that the same care we will want for our own children is the same care that orphaned and vulnerable children deserve. This is where we will ask all well-meaning supporters and partners of this work to close their eyes and picture one child from their own family. Could be a son, a daughter, a niece, or a nephew, right? That's it, a grandchild or other child. So looking at that child's face, they will list what they want for them. And of course, that list has always come back with amazing things like we wish for that child to, we know, right? Things like we want the child to be safe. We want the child to be loved, to belong, to have a family, to thrive. And on that list, I have never seen someone say they want their child or a child that they know, to go live in an orphanage, right? They will prefer that child to go and stay with another family member if something happened to them. So the question becomes, if we want these things, all of these great things, these good things for a child we know personally, right, and care about, don't we want for the children we serve as well, for the children we are here in the US, we want to support to make sure they get a better life as well? Children grow best in the love and care of families. So a safe, loving family is the most essential source of belonging, emotional support, and physical and mental development for children. So don't we all want healthier and happier children, flourishing in a brighter and better future? We do. Well, It all starts with making families and communities stronger and helping them stay together and not separated. We have to shift our mindset to helping children grow in families. This shift from residential care to family-based care is so important for bringing harmony to families that prepares them for a future where they can thrive. And if you make families stronger and help them to thrive, what happens? Their communities also get stronger and they also begin to thrive. The world continues to become a better place for all of us to live in. Of course, moving to family-based care, right, has to be very intentional, as Brian was saying. It has to be intentional and planned in order to ensure empowerment. If you place a child back into a family, right, without addressing the root causes that brought them to the orphanage in the first place, you may be creating new problems and will not be ensuring their successful future as well. So like our process includes tracing the families of the children and determining which family member is best equipped to raise the child. We always start with the parents and then expand out to the aunts, the uncles, the grandparents. If there's no family member at all in these categories, or if the family is unable, which is normally not the case, which is rare, then we can look into foster care with a local family, ideally someone who knew the child and or their family previously, like a neighbor or like a family friend, right? So then next, we prepare both the families and the children to make sure they are ready emotionally to live together again. So depending on how long the family and child have been separated, this includes, parenting classes, attachment theory trainings, and multiple visits, both at the family home and as well as the facility where the child is living. So often it needs to be a gradual process so that the family can reestablish their bond. Once the families are reunited, right, this is where then we can provide a wrap-around care to make sure the family stays together. This is where family strengthening programs that build the capacity of that family, increase our resilience to manage on their own. Those critical elements, they become very, very much important. But the end here is children need communities. Children need families. Institutions or orphanages do not meet a child's long-term needs. So when they are part of a family, children also become a part of their broader communities. So let's rethink orphans and orphanages, and let's start to invest in families, providing resources and helping strengthen and empowering those that are being trapped by the extreme poverty. Because together, doing this, we can surely continue to raise a generation of children that will thrive in families while getting access to those tools they need to make a better future. Thank you.
Thank you. Before we go into our Q&A time, I just have one last question for you guys. What advice do you have for those of us doing this important work?
Yeah, when people hear messages like this, there's often a couple of responses that happen. Some people just ignore it and just keep on doing what they were doing before. They don't believe the message that they could be actually hurting people. But the research that we're talking about is quite clear. Children are relational creatures. We're not just bodies. We are highly integrated body, soul, relational creatures. And highly integrated body, soul, relational creatures thrive in environments that foster relationships. And so there's an enormous amount of research on this. And so some of us are just going to ignore what we're hearing today, and that would be a mistake. It would be to not steward truth. Others are going to just go into despair and say, you know what, I've been doing so many bad things and I'm a failure, and I'm just going to give up and wash my hands and not do anything. And I would submit to you that neither of those responses are the right responses. We're all broken. We're all in process. Christ redeems our mistakes. He takes things that we meant for good that weren't, and he fixes them and uses them for his good. Nabs is sitting here. He's one example of that. And so the right response is to learn and to repent of our mistakes and then grow. Do it better. There's plenty of organizations out there that are strengthening families. There's plenty of organizations like NABS that are trying to transition out of orphanages into family-based care. There are solutions, there's hope, there's answers here. We just have to redeploy our resources to pursue Christ's mission. In the process, all of us will grow more and more into the image of Jesus Christ. And that's the greatest thing.
Yes, I think I'll add to that. Thank you so much, Brian. Yeah, it's important that we have got this. It's not about people being discouraged that they have not been doing the good thing. I mean, we do what we know best. So to all of us that are involved in a ministry like this, thank you. First of all, as we say, it is a hard work. Caring for a child is about building the capacity of the child to prepare them for tomorrow, right? And how they will fit into tomorrow and how they will navigate the world. We all now understand that children need the time, they need that love, they need that relationship, that one-on-one attention and emotional connection that family engagement can bring. So, because when children spend many years separated from family, they can lose their culture, they can lose their traditions, their language. But when they grow up in families, they grow in the knowledge of where they belong. I spent that many years in an orphanage with access to all those resources, which I am still grateful for today, and still grateful for all those donors and partners who supported me. But I'm still repairing. I'm still trying to connect with my family. I'm still trying to speak my mother's language. I spoke English throughout the time in the orphanage to satisfy the missionaries who came to visit me. Wherein my mom, my community majority could never speak English. So every time I get to talk with my mom when I left the orphanage, it has to stick on. My little brother had to become the interpreter to tell me what I'm saying. So like, just be able to be connected to my culture, knowing all those people that I belong to. It's important for others' identity. Those identity questions: do I belong? Do I matter? Where am I coming from? And my voice, all of those questions, what make us human, right? It's important. So for many institutions, thinking to make this kind of shift to family care, to supporting children in family, even if you're a donor or supporter, trying to see how can I shift my resources to programs that are really helping to create sustainability, to make sure they are moving from handout really to a hand-up, where families are able to become equipped and take care of this. How can I go to them, right? And so help them do this work. So please know that it is possible to do that. And it is a rewarding journey. I know we may have fear and concerns because we are used to one thing, we're trying to shift to another thing. So it is understandable. We had the same fears and concerns when we were trying to shift our own model of care. We have so many how questions. How can we find the families of these children? How can we communicate this to our donors? How can we repurpose our buildings? How about the staff? So when I was leading this process on the ground with my staff, I called this transformation journey from how to wow, because there are wow solutions to all of those how questions. Many organizations have already done this. So there's a system in place now. Transitioning is not the end of anything. It is the beginning of everything. It is expansion. It is transformation. It is growth. We can make this happen. It's never too late because we all care. We have the same purpose: helping vulnerable children be better. So where they can be better, we said it's a better way. It's family, it's home. As an African proverb says, you see, home is not just where these children live. Home is not where we live. Home is where we truly belong. And that home is family. So let's get these kids home. Let's get them into family. Thank you very much.
Beautiful, Nabs. Thank you for that. Thanks to both, to Brian and to Nabs. I think it's so important what you're saying, Nabs, because there's this automatic knee-jerk response that all of us have. I feel bad about this. I'm not doing it in the best way. Someone might criticize me, or an anger. Why are you criticizing my benevolence? What's that about? And in fact, I mean, you point to something really important. One of the learnings that we had as we wrote the book was the power of a question. Because this is not our mission, this is God's mission. All we need to do is align ourselves with God's energy, with God's solution for this particular problem. That takes a weight of burden off us. We don't, the complexities pale in comparison to God's abundant mercy and love for the situation, for the community, and for the particular child we're talking about. I remember sitting with a group of mothers and teachers and fathers in a highland community in Peru. It's a community that's it's one of the most toxic communities in the world. A large US-owned metal smelter there was putting out toxic emissions every day, and 92% of the kids had lead poisoning in this community, about 8,000 kids total. And as we sat with the parents, one of the pastors from Lima who had traveled up with us was paused for a moment. He said, "Gosh, what would we do if these were our kids?" And one of the Catholic lay workers looked him in the eye and said, "But brother, these are your kids." And our mission was realigned with the mission of Jesus Christ, because we are one family with differences, with all of the gifts and skills and dreams and brokenness that we carry in us. But at the same time, if we can see that this is not about us, it's not our mission, we're simply joining in this joyful throng of people who are seeking to be faithful to the mission of Jesus Christ. In our book, Freeing Congregational Mission, we just try to lay out some concrete strategies. And my colleague, Bala Kelep, developed 7 tools that evangelical, Catholic, and mainline Protestant mission leaders were asking us for, things to help them lead their congregations into more faithful and effective mission. We're hopeful about this, and though it does feel like a lot to swallow, particularly if it's the first time you're hearing these messages, the good news is that God walks with us and desires for us to align our lives and our energy and our gifts and talents with what God is doing in the world. So that to us is really good news.
Yeah, thank you guys for sharing. Everyone, we have just touched on the wisdom that these authors have, so make sure you check out their books. This is Nab's book. If you've been moved by some of his sharing, this is his memoir. It is really good. We're gonna have a book club on it later this year. This is the short-term missions version of When Helping Hurts, but all of the stuff that the Chalmers Center puts out is amazing. And then of course, our friend Hunter's book with his colleague is really good as well. So we hope that you check all of those out. Before we get to our Q&A, I just wanted to let you know we have a special opportunity coming up to continue this conversation on June 27th. We have a webinar, and I'm putting it in the chat, called Rethinking Orphan Care, where we're going to go just more in depth of how our mission work to respond to the scriptural mandate to care for the orphan and the widow can be more effective and impactful for children around the world. We will send you the link to register in a follow-up email. It's also in the chat. And in the meantime, check out Faith to Action's free resources on best practices in orphan care. We are here to help, so feel free to reach out with any questions. And finally, while we didn't go in depth on the topic of short-term missions, we know that many of you are involved in that work. So our partners at Missions Excellence, home of the Standards of Excellence in Short-Term Missions, have offered a follow-up meeting, and we will send details for how to sign up for that in our follow-up email as well. So this concludes our webinar portion, but we would like to invite you to stay on and participate in the question and answer portion, where you'll be able to ask the experts featured here some of your questions. And we're going to go ahead and move right to that. First question we have here is, if my congregation is partnered with a congregation in another country that chooses to support its needy children in an orphanage setting, what is my role in asserting influence to go into another direction? I've usually deferred to my partner to decide its own programs, and that's from Thomas. So if you want to.
Well, I'm happy to start the answer, if that's helpful. The last chapter of our book is Strategies for Leadership in Mission. And one of the challenges to us is our churches work in a conflict-averse setting, right? No one wants to ruffle any feathers. Each of us has our favorite charities that we want to support with the either limited or shrinking dollars available to the mission committee or the group that's engaging in benevolence at the church. we share some specific strategies, and I just sort of frame all of them around one. It's each one teach one. Look for that individual or two in your own group, in your own setting of leaders. Who are those influencers who need to have a profoundly different understanding of mission? Invite them into an experience, have conversation with folks like Nabs, Brian, others who can help them see a deeper understanding. We provide some concrete strategies in the book because we found that if you raise a question about a person's benevolence, you risk stepping in front of a Mack truck. It is like people, there's a deep sense of sensitivity around it. And we've got to find ways, and I think Brian so beautifully modeled that. All of us are broken. All of us are sinners. None of us are doing this perfectly. This is really tough work. So together we need to invoke the power of God's Holy Spirit to lead us into deeper ways of understanding God's mission and to engage in it more faithfully. I think it requires a lot of humility, even among us in our mission committee, because people in this setting are very sensitive to, and I can't imagine what Brian's book did when it first hit the press, and when helping hurts, because I know I've heard of a lot of folks who were, felt wounded by that, because these are tough realities. Yeah, and others will have their word.
Yeah, I think too, as you guys all mentioned, that colonial aspect of bringing orphanages in, that is a layered concept. When your partners are choosing an orphanage, what does that really mean? Who initially brought that concept there? So I think these are really good questions to think about. And I mean, it is my job with Faith to Action to talk through people, help people through questions like this. So I would love to talk more in depth as well. I don't know if Nabs or Brian, you have anything else to add to this question?
I'll just add that, change is very hard, but there are things that we know provide opportunities for change. And one of those things are teachable moments, that there sometimes the Lord brings us into places where we're more open to being taught than before. I actually think that this is potentially a very teachable moment for the U.S. church. I mean, my word, it's a little hard to be proud right now when you look at the state of the American church, at the state of the American culture. People can feel it's not working. There's something that's gone terribly wrong. It's my view that we don't know what human flourishing looks like, and we don't know how to get there. And that means there's a better story that we introduce people to. But the confidence that's so often present in American culture, we're losing it. But that's an opportunity to speak truth. The way we've been going isn't working. We can all feel it. There's a better way. And so I think there's a really great opportunity here for change.
Yeah, to add to that, I mean, it's we all talk about these things. We like, if you know better, you try to do better. So again, there's no shame, there's no blame. It's all about sharing and learning. So it's like people mean well who have been doing this thing over the years, and things we knew we cannot continue to fight tomorrow's battle or today's battle with yesterday bread, something, or tools that are not really more, they're kind of getting out of way, learning new things and be able to do something that can change for better, not kind of stuff. So like talking to people to mindset, to shift their mindset into approach, like look, this is how we have been doing this for decades. And now research and personal experiences and people who have lived through have said, this is how there's a better way for us to do it. And this is, which can be able to give more, it can become more impactful the way you have been doing. Like we talk to donors, who tell them you have been giving this amount of money to support one child for 20 years of their life in an orphanage, $25. But what if there's another way you can still give your money into $25, but now the same money can go to help this same child and also the siblings of that child. And guess what? The family get to stay together. They don't have to suffer the trauma of being separated. And then you are not going to continue to support this child forever. Maybe it's a commitment for 3 years and 2 years, because the goal is we are not going to continue to deepen dependency. It's more of a bottom-top approach. Development is changing, where we will go to the community and tell the poor family, oh, you are hungry, you need a bag of rice. Is that really what they need? They eat the rice, tomorrow they say, I want more bag of rice. It's a handout approach. But how do we change that mindset to say, you know what? You don't have to keep giving. How can you make sure these families, they are called vulnerable, but because of this kind of support, which has been in existence for many years, this is unintentionally reinforcing that these families think they are not enough, they are not capable, they don't have enough, but they are strong, they are resilient, they know their lives better than we do. So they have solutions that can make things right, that is sustainable, that can expand the impact of your generosity, expand the impact of the way you do things. So sometimes trying to just think a little bit through that there's a better way, and we are willing to learn, because as long as we are living, we are prone to changing. So just understanding those concepts can be meaningful ways to be able to shift people's mindset and influence other activities that relating to this mission work.
Thank you, guys. Our next question comes from Felicia, and she says, what recommendations do you give to those local organizations who want to change the old models to a new one, but are afraid that their international donors are going to stop providing financial aid?
Yes, I mean, I can start with that. I mean, there are a lot of tools there. I mean, the organization who have transitioned this, and I'm very honored to I'm blessed to be able to lead an organization through the transition. When we are doing it, we are the first organization to do it in West Africa successfully. We didn't even know other organizations were planning to do this. So we learned a lot of lessons along the way. And since then, many organizations around the world, countries, they are working on doing the same thing. I'm just from Kenya yesterday or so, and they really are working on a lot of organizations helping them to transition. Obviously, there are a lot of questions, and there are tools in place, and there are answers in place to those questions. So first of all, it's kind of just agreeing that you want to make the change, and then reaching out to the right support community that can help you. Faith to Action is one of those people. They can help you. They know of organizations that can be able to support you with this transition to mindset, and thinking about the donors, changing the mindset. There are all these phases of informing the children. How are they going to take it? What communication how do you talk to them? The families, the stakeholders, and define these various stakeholders, the children, the families as well, the staff you are working with, and then the local community, to be involved in that. And then think about now, what type of message are you going to give to these donors to make sure they painted a picture for them that will say, wow, is this how my money is going to be, the impact of my money is going to be amplified, it's going to be maximized? I want to be behind that. And we saw that happening with our own donor base when we transition. They thought, why didn't you transition all along? Why have you not done this all along? And we got more donors, and we got more people wanting to do it, because it's important. They all care for these children. They want to do the best for these children. So sometimes some of these concerns, some of these fears, we may have them, but may not be the same the way the American donors are thinking about, because they have a different assumption about the children living in those institutions. But once you're trying to paint the picture for them, let them see how the children are going to be flourishing, how the families are going to be flourishing, how they themselves as donors and partners are going to be flourishing in that vision. They will be all on board, and there are systems in place, there are communication templates, and all of those things in place. Just reaching out to the right organization, I say like Faith to Action, Helping Children Worldwide, other organizations that support this work, and they can be able to help you to say, yes, these are how steps we can go through this to make it happen. But yes, donor communication can be very sensitive. That this fear is genuine. It's true that you can't be afraid of not them to lose money or things like that, which money is important, but not at the expense of the long-term impacts that the children can have when they live in the orphanage for too long.
Thank you for sharing. The next question, if nobody wants to pop in, is about selfie missions from Richard. He said, given that selfie missions, as you described, can be easy relative to the hard work of lifelong walking with the poor, how would you characterize the required heart change rather than behavior change that may be required deep within the church? And what would guiding that change look like from the pulpit in adult discipleship groups, Sunday schools, and things of that nature?
Wow. In a sense, it's a call to conversion. It's almost at the depth of a reconversion. It requires us to turn away from our cultural religion, our cultural religious trappings, and turn to the suffering servant who took a knee and washed the feet of his followers. That requires a radical change for us, and particularly in the U.S. church, kind of at the end of the Christendom era, we enjoy the perks, we enjoy the privilege that comes with, if you wanted to make business deals in the 1960s and 70s, you went to church, right? In my hometown and yours probably too. That was just the place where power met and made decisions, oftentimes for the rest of the community. I think all of us can lament many of the changes in the U.S. church, but I, for one, am grateful for this moment, despite the pain, that the church is being forced to take a knee, and we're having to suddenly look through the eyes of the suffering servant rather than from a triumphant king. And I think that it's a helpful corrective to our theology. What would a pastor, a leader, a Sunday school teacher, a youth leader engage? One of the strategies we talk about in our book is get folks out of the church building, get them into the community, volunteer a morning at the shelter down the street, and don't just pass the meals over the stainless steel countertop, but sit at table with. And then after you've had that experience, sit together with the members of your mission committee or your Sunday school class and reflect on that experience. Where did you see God at work in that moment? And that can begin this change of the heart. I think, unfortunately, so oftentimes we allow it to be purely intellectual. And Brian, I'll confess, I'm a Presbyterian too, and we like that head, but we often don't allow the Spirit to enter into our hearts as well. And as we share these stories, as you hear the situation of people living in your community who are living unhoused, their children exposed to the elements, you suddenly begin to develop a different understanding of the causes of poverty and how God's people are invited and in fact compelled to join with God in responding to that. So be encouraged. There are spaces like this. Praise God for the Faith to Action initiative. The Chalmers Institute, NAB's work is critical. Your own, Stephanie and Conbit. These are spaces. These are it's the leaven that's being worked into this dough that's really starting to build spaces of God's realm. And I think that's critically important. So I feel very encouraged by this conversation. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. The next question comes from Michelle, and she asks, in light of the dangers of selfie missions, what are creative, healthy, potentially new ways you have seen churches engage their congregants in global missions?
I think it starts with first narrating a different story. Again, it's a story that's different from get your soul beamed to heaven and pursue the American dream. It's what Hunter was talking about. It's the story of the way of Christ. It's the story of self-sacrifice. It's the story of a king who rides into Jerusalem, not on a tank, but on a donkey, and achieves his coronation on a cross. And we've just completely lost sight of this. And so it's narrating a different story. And then it's starting to practice that. It's starting to say, you know what, when we go on our short-term mission trips, maybe it's not about us. Maybe it's actually about the people that God has placed there over the long haul. Maybe it's not about us having a great experience. Maybe it's about us dying to ourselves to be part of God's global mission. Maybe it's about taking a backseat role when we're on the ground so that the primary manifestation of Christ in that community, the local church that's already there, is elevated. And we're behind the scenes. We're behind the scenes. The head of a major Christian relief and development agency called Tear Fund, which is out of the United Kingdom, which works all over the world. Huge organization. The head of that organization told me that success for him is when he visits one of the poor communities where Tear Fund has been equipping the local church, and he visits those communities, and nobody thanks him for anything, and nobody asks him for anything, because they don't even see Tear Fund. They see the local church as having been the instrument of change there. And so we've got our entire posture has to be different. And it starts off with understanding who it is that we're serving. Our king comes riding on a colt, not on a tank.
That's really good. Thank you for sharing. I'm reminded too of a friend of mine named Nathan, who might be on this call, but he is a missions pastor, and he has had that kind of relationship with a lot of different partners. And right now he's been doing essentially reverse mission trips where he's had their partners come and teach their international partners, their global partners, come and teach local partners in the Seattle area how to do effective mission as well. So I think that's really cool.
You know, it's definitely just to springboard off of that.
Oh yeah.
We are not, the American church isn't prepared to be a minority church. We're not prepared to lead out of being marginalized. We're not prepared to serve Christ's kingdom from positions of brokenness, of poverty. Many of our brothers and sisters around the world who are in very poor churches, who are in regions that are oppressed, have learned how to be salt and light from the bottom. We don't have a clue how to do that in America. And so one of the things they can teach us is how to be faithful in a post-Christian culture. We don't have a clue.
That's so good. Thank you for sharing that. The next question I have is for Nabs. It's from Christy, and she says, Nabs, can you describe some of the specific ways that you have seen that are effective for supporting vulnerable families that empowers them?
Sure. Again, there are kind of two approaches here, with two kind of changing mindset. Here, talk about the intervention aspect and the prevention. So intervention and prevention, very critical. So like some of the changes here is because initially you take child, assess the child and place them in an orphanage. And then there's no plan of, okay, what next? What happened to their family? How long are they going to live there? But now with the new mindset of kind of trying to intervene, first is that you can see care for children. That is a core. We know child is in the circle. Care for the child, take the child, assess the child, place them, try to look at them interim care facility, or whether they need to go straight home or from the streets or from the orphanage. And then tracing their family comes into place, where you trace their family, you try to reunite the children with their family, and then you empower their family. That empowering part is what is that is the reunification aspect. So out of some of these practices here to make sure the family stays together. That's where I talk about family strengthening programs. Like you think about not only training, there are two components. You can do the attachment theory training, like trying to bond, have those children heal from the trauma. The families heal from the trauma, know that they have been separated for quite a long time. How can they continue to live together as family again? And then preventing them from not going to the street again, or the child going back to another orphanage. Why are they in the orphanage? Why are they on the street? Of course, the underlying cause, poverty. Doing a thorough assessment. There's a tool called the Family Status Index. Most of you are familiar with the Child Status Index, just a rephrase of that's called the Family Status Index, assessing the family need, because these families have needs. Let them sit down to what are their greatest needs, what needs to be done to make sure you are able to take care of your child, from a child not to go to the street or go to an orphanage. They're not going to ask you they want to be rich. They're not going to ask you they want a nice car or something like that. There are the tools should be able to tell you exactly what exactly is needed, really, together with them. And we work together with our partners to address those needs, wherein they are also provided an input to say, okay, it will take us, the thing says, it will take you like 2 years, 3 years for you to be able to improve, to start eating food, like 2 meals a day, at least 50% of the time year round. How long will that take you? What do you need? The mother needs to be enrolled into a microfinance training. Bring her into a program. She learned about saving, budgeting, financial management. She gets a small loan, about $50 or $100. And then she opens a bank account. She put that in there, wherein they are doing some business skills going on. and they are also saving. They're also saving, and every day that money belongs to them. You are preparing them, creating what we call capacity, resilience, and consistency, so that they can be able to maintain that over the long haul. So maybe just 3 years, and you are monitoring the strong case management in place. Time is done for them to be released from the support, where they are now at a point they are able to take care of themselves and their own children. They really no longer need you so that they can do their support. Of course, you keep monitoring and see that things are going in place, and they are living together. Eventually, once they release them from support, they become mentors to new families. So like being blessed, becoming blessing to others. And then you can help many more families. So that's just one of the programs, the family strengthening program, like the microfinance program, the strengthening there, they do that. And then there's a program like we call like the Zoe's Empowers program, where mentor, where we look at all these child-headed household or youth-headed household and bring them into groups and be able to empower them to say, okay, enroll into business and have them raise goats or chickens or open their own shops. And then they can give that money back to the group. So the group manages that money. You are teaching them leadership, you are teaching them sustainability, so that when they want to take loan, they go back to the group and come back. So these are all processes out there. So the question, to answer that question is, family strengthening programs are there. There are a lot of techniques that are useful, and they have to be contextually based in the context, what is applicable there. But yes, these are awesome questions, like helping children worldwide. We have a program called the Breaking Bread, where we fellowship, where we gather together as a lot of people asking questions about how do you do this? I want to transition, how does that happen? This Breaking Bread session, where we host, normally you can reach out to Helping Children Worldwide or to Faith to Action, they can reach out to us. We'll be happy to work with you and see how we can help you host a Breaking Bread session where we can come together and learn about, answer all these hard conversation, have this hard conversation and answer all these questions and see, here are steps. This is how we can overcome this. And this is how we can connect you to an organization that is doing this in East Africa or in West Africa, in North Africa, or in Asia. So we can go to connect you to those people in order to help you through this transition process. But yes, there are tools in place and there are resources in place out there. So we will be more than welcome and happy to support you through this journey. It's a rewarding journey. Over.
Thank you. We have another question from Rusty. He asks, what's the best way to encourage missions pastors who often seem very disempowered, whose jobs feel like travel agents and volunteer placement agents? The demand to go on trips and serve as volunteers seems insatiable.
Yeah, thanks for the great question, Rusty. And we narrate in Freeing Congregational Missions, we narrate the story of a missions pastor, a large evangelical church in the South, who felt her job was more akin to that of a cruise social director. A social director on a cruise ship. To keep the campers happy was kind of the mentality of even her bosses who would manage her to keep folks happy and engaging and giving. And so you realize we become these consuming units that Brian was referring to earlier in the conversation. We're perfectly acting out, and putting our money in the right spots so certain mission industries can grow. I think I sympathize with leaders who are standing in front of a group of people and who are beginning to raise questions saying, are we doing this in the way of Jesus? I mean, what a difficult question to ask a group of people who are trying to do their best and trying to help and are giving, sometimes sacrificially. I do think it's critical to have some clear strategies in mind as you step in. You don't want to step in front of the bus. You need to know where you're stepping. And so the last half of our book is dedicated to kind of lifting up these points of light. Stories, a Ghanaian American pastor in Iowa who helps his congregation go deeper into mission as relationship. A missions pastor in the Methodist Church in Louisiana, who helps her congregation to understand the power, the challenge of transformative mission that goes both ways, transforming them, transforming us. Each of these folks kind of shares a story and a lesson that we can draw from it in being able to engage our folks more powerfully and much more effectively. Yeah, thanks. Great question.
Sadly, that is our last question for right now. We had so many good questions, but we have run out of time. Thank you guys all so much for joining us, and thank you to our panelists. There will be an email sent out with the follow-up questions recording, the whole recording, and including the follow-up questions. And we'll include links to the resources that we shared, including Faith to Actions. And yeah, thank you guys so much. I hope you have a really great rest of your day. Thank you.